where we're going to objectively unpack a massive, historic, intellectual boxing match. In one corner, we have Eugene Dühring and his quest for absolute eternal truths. And in the other, Frederick Engels with a fierce historical materialist rebuttal. We're using the exact arguments from the source text to map out how these two totally distinct worldviews collide over truth, morality, equality, law, and ultimately human freedom. Let's get right into it. Here is our agenda for today's breakdown. First up, we'll look at the quest for eternal truths. Second, is morality universal? Third, the myth of absolute equality. Fourth, law and local reality. And fifth, freedom as understanding necessity. All right, starting with Section 1, the quest for eternal truths. So Dühring is all about this top-down, abstract idealism. He genuinely believes you can start with pure, pristine concepts and just deduce reality from them. But Engels flips that entirely. Using a historical materialist method, he argues that you simply can't force reality to fit neatly into a conceptual box. Instead, you have to look at changing historical and material reality from the bottom up. You derive your concepts from what actually exists out there in the world. To really challenge Dühring's claim to absolute truth, Engels categorizes human knowledge into three distinct columns. Think about the exact sciences, stuff like math and physics. Okay, sure, we do find some final truths there. Then you have the biological sciences. Living organisms are so incredibly complex that we have to operate mostly on hypotheses. But then we hit the historical sciences, which deal with human society. And here, absolute truths are exceptionally rare. Because society is constantly evolving, our knowledge of it is essentially relative. To really hammer this point home, Engels points straight to Boyle's law. You know, the one about the pressure and volume of gases. Well, scientists eventually discovered that this law only holds true under very specific conditions, and it completely fails when gases are compressed to liquefaction. So Engels asks a brilliant question. If a physicist won't even claim an absolute, unchanging truth for the behavior of a simple gas, how on earth can a philosopher claim it for the massive, shifting complexities of human society? Which brings us right into Section 2. Is morality universal? Engels makes the case that moral codes absolutely aren't universal. Just look at modern Europe at the time. Three completely distinct moralities existed side by side. You had the Christian feudal morality left over from the Middle Ages, the modern bourgeois morality of the capitalist present, and the proletarian morality pointing toward the future. Engels argues that humans unconsciously derive their ethical ideas from the practical, everyday economic relations of their specific era. It's not magic, it's economics. Let's make this super concrete. Take the classic commandment, thou shalt not steal. Dühring might call this a timeless, eternal moral axiom. But Engels points out that this rule really only makes sense in a society based on private property. Imagine a future society where everyone simply has what they need and the motives for theft are entirely eliminated. In that world, preaching this eternal law would just get you laughed out of the room. It's a localized rule, not a universal law of nature. And then, well, we get to one of the most bizarre parts of Dühring's argument when he tries to explain the origin of evil. He actually writes that the guile of a cat is on the exact same plane as similar character types in humans, literally concluding, evil is the cat. Engels really highlights the utter absurdity here. I mean, after promising a morality valid for all universes, Dühring reduces the profound, age-old philosophical problem of evil to feline traits. You literally can't make this up. Moving on to Section 3, the myth of absolute equality. So what is Dühring's starting point for human society? He basically puts two abstract, perfect humans in a total vacuum to mathematically prove absolute equality. He strips away all national, economic, and personal realities, leaving just two blank human wills. And because they're identical concepts in his mind, he declares them entirely equal, claiming neither can subject the other. But Engels points out that the second you step out of that abstract vacuum and look at real people, that math totally falls apart. Using this great two shipwrecked men analogy, the text shows how real-world differences shatter this abstract equality. Think about it. If person A is energetic, quick-witted, and determined, and person B is lazy and irresolute, person A is inevitably going to impose their will on person B. It's the material differences that dictate the social dynamic, not some abstract axiom. And the real kicker here? Dühring himself realizes his axiom doesn't actually work in reality, so he starts introducing exceptions. He claims, well, equality doesn't apply to people with inadequate self-determination, or those acting out of superstition. Engels jumps on this, noting that this exact kind of loophole was historically used to justify horrific real-world atrocities, like General Kaufman's brutal massacre of the Yomud tribe.
By creating an exception for superstition, Dühring's grand eternal equality accidentally becomes a perfect justification for subjugation.
Engels counters that the demand for equality isn't a mathematical given at all. It's actually a highly specific historical product that evolved over thousands of years. Look back at ancient Rome. Equality only applied to citizens, completely excluding slaves. It wasn't until the bourgeois era, where the capitalist system actively required free workers and equal rights for trade, that equality became a widespread demand. It's a direct product of economic history. All right, Section 4, Law and Local Reality. Engels methodically tears down Dühring's claim of creating a universal legal philosophy by exposing some massive blind spots. For one, Dühring is seemingly completely ignorant of the French Code Napoleon, which was literally the most modern civil code of his time. He also falsely claims that a unanimous jury is impossible, conveniently ignoring that English common law had required them for centuries. So Dühring's universal laws he claimed were fit for all planets, were actually based entirely on isolated, antiquated Prussian administrative practices. It's local reality masquerading as cosmic truth. And that brings us to our final act, Section 5, Freedom as Understanding Necessity. The way Dühring pictures freedom is like a mechanical balancing act, a parallelogram of forces. You've got rational judgment pulling one way, irrational impulse pulling another, and freedom is just the diagonal line sitting right in between. But Engels totally rejects this mathematical approach. Following historical materialism, he defines freedom not as a balance of forces, but as the actual capacity to make decisions based on a real, concrete knowledge of natural laws. Drawing heavily on the philosopher Hegel, the argument here is that freedom isn't some magical, mystical independence from nature. Rather, it's the conscious mastery of nature through understanding. When you don't understand the laws of physics or biology or economics, you are completely at their mercy. They're a blind necessity. But the moment you understand them, you can use them to your advantage. And that understanding is what actually makes you free. You can see human freedom expanding practically across history through technological mastery. When early humans finally learned to generate fire by friction, they gained control over a raw force of nature. That was a massive step towards freedom. Fast forward to the invention of the steam engine, which reverses that process by turning heat back into motion, and humanity gains even greater mastery. Freedom, in this view, is the literal, historical progression of scientific and technical capability. Finally, the text takes a quick, neutral look at Dühring's law of difference. Dühring claims it's a profound scientific law that experiencing the same state over and over leads to stagnation, and so we need varying stimuli. Engels basically laughs this off, pointing out how Dühring dresses up incredibly simple, everyday observations, essentially just a platitude about getting bored, in grandiose language, and then masquerades it as deep, groundbreaking science. And that wraps up our intellectual dissection for today. But before we go, I want to leave you with a final, genuinely provocative thought derived straight from the historical materialist method. If every single moral code, legal system, and scientific law from the past was limited by the economic realities of its era, well, which of our current, deeply held, eternal truths will tomorrow's historians look back on and just laugh at? I challenge you to apply this exact lens to your own beliefs and see what holds up.